Hello and welcome to the How2Exit Podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How2Exit Podcast. Today I'm here with Les Csorba, and he is the CEO coach. He's an author. He is a partner at Heidrick Struggles. They do premier executive search. A leader in this industry, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. I see that you have one book out, you've got another one coming out. I'm really interested in the topic that you like to write about. It's true to my heart, so we're going to have a fun conversation today, and I'm hoping to learn from you. So that's the goal of these shows, is if I can learn from you, then our audience gets to learn. So thank you for being here today, Les.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate you having me on.
You have a really interesting past. I always have people start with their origin story so that the audience can kind of bond with who they're listening to. But you have a really interesting past with working with some fairly famous people. So can you give us our origin story, kind of what led you to where you're at now? And don't hold back. Tell us, this is the time to toot your horn a little bit so you can let the audience know.
Well, thank you. I really started in government when I was in college in California, the University of California at Davis. I was very fortunate to land an internship in the United States Senate, and it was between my junior and senior year, and I really enjoyed Washington and the history, and so I went back there after I graduated and ultimately joined. Was fortunate and blessed to be part of the first Bush administration in presidential personnel for 4 years, really handling the appointment process. And when that ended in 1992, the natural transition for me in business was executive search, recruiting, headhunting, if you will, and have been in that business now, 32, 33 years. Primarily, I'm now in Houston, so as you can imagine, focused primarily in the energy business, the oil and gas business. So I do a lot of CEO and board succession work, advising energy companies on CEO succession, board succession, and other leadership consulting. And I do some coaching. I coach some CEOs and executives, which is a lot of fun. And anyways, that's a quick snapshot of my story.
So executive search. So one of the reasons I let's get this guy on here was because of that. Every entrepreneur that's out there looking to buy companies, I'd say 60% of them have this either dream, or sometimes it's a fallacy, but they're going to buy a company, put another operator in place. They're going to go find themselves a CEO to run it, and they're going to go buy another company. They're going to be more of a passive investor. And I think they underestimate what it truly is to find a great operator, how long an executive search takes, what that can cost, and how to even choose. Most of these guys don't even know how to pick. They've never been a great leader, so they don't know how to pick one either. They don't know how to identify something, right? So I'm interested in your thoughts on what does that process look like? What makes a great leader? Well, let's break it down. What does the process of finding somebody that can run a company look like? What is that? What is that?
Yeah.
What is the process you go through?
Yeah, I mean, I start with a bias, and it probably doesn't surprise you or your listeners that leadership is the key factor in building and leading a successful business. I often get tease some of my friends in banking or in management consulting that some might make the argument that it's all about the capital, or the strategy or the technology. By the way, those are all important. You got to have all of that. But if you don't have the right leadership, driving your strategy, driving your technology, and figuring out how to allocate capital, it's just not going to work. So I think the businesses that I've seen that have been sustained and successful over the years, that have created great value for their shareholders, have outstanding leadership. And, very simply, Ron, I would say the leaders that have resonated and have been the best of the best over the years are those that are extremely self-aware. They tend to have two what seems to be contradictory qualities. They have incredible self-belief and determination and confidence without the self-absorption. And if you think about it, that's hard to pull off unless you have high self-awareness. So that's really the argument I make in the book.
Yeah, I believe heavily that all of us are riddled with tons of different cognitive biases, and that we don't. A lot of times we don't even acknowledge or know that we have them, right?
Yeah.
And to be aware of your own areas of needs improvement, to be willing to work on them, is a special class of human being. Not everybody exhibits that. It's a very high level of emotional intelligence that enables somebody to be able to, okay, I believe I can get this done, but I'm going to need some help in this area and this area because those are my weak points, right?
Yeah.
So, what?
Yeah. Yeah. And everything, unfortunately, right now in our culture seems to be working against, developing self-awareness or high self-awareness. So you have to work hard. You have to be intentional and disciplined about it. There's just so many distractions. Obviously, our digital culture, our social media world, technology, all these wonderful productivity tools, they're incredible, but at the same time, they can mitigate self-awareness. So leaders have to be very intentional about it. They have to be willing to have candid conversations with their team and ask the question, hey, how did I show up in that last meeting? Tell me, where did I shine? Where did I really stand out? But where did I kind of fall down? And have those candid, brave conversations that are essential in building self-awareness.
Yeah, I hear a lot of that. Everybody's whole, perfect, and complete, just the way they are. And it's like, yeah, as long as you're willing to realize that you're whole, perfectly, and completely a mess sometimes, right? So, there's this whole, I think, area in today's society that everybody's trying to push that we're all whole, perfect, and complete, no matter who we are, and that just doesn't leave any room for improvement, right? You can't be whole, perfect, and complete, and be somebody who needs better communication, or somebody who doesn't step over people in meetings or whatever. We all have room for improvement, right? And I like being around in a positive world. I get it, but there's also the time for self-reflection and improvement, and how do other people perceive you. So that's impressive that you take that approach, because so many people just look at history, right? They want to say, oh, they took this company from 0 to a million, or from 1 million to 100 million, right? And they don't look at why, right? Mm-hmm. Or they just think, well, it was technical leadership, or they think it was financial leadership. When I think it's a more holistic view to say, there are quite a few people out there who have great communication skills, great skills of raising capital and getting things going, but they don't have the fortitude to, or I don't know what the words I'm looking for. They just can't succeed because they can't have the technical. They're missing one of the other elements, right? The one that keeps coming to my mind is WeWork, right? Guy can tell a story, raise money, get things going. People believe in him. People are handing him billions of dollars, but at the end, I don't know. It was just on that one. I think there was a lot of moral issues, right? A lot of issues where spending money where you that wasn't on track with the company, overdoing things and stuff like that. But in most cases, I honestly think, what's the old saying? A fish rots from the head down, right?
Yeah.
If the organization's afoul, it's usually the leader that's letting them either leading them that way or letting them stray.
Yeah, I would say that the leaders that I've admired over the years, the ones that have really had an impact, are those that recognize that they're not a finished product. And every successful leader has had some adversity and some disappointment, mistakes, valleys that they've had to go through along the way. And the ones that learn from those and sort of seize the opportunity in terms of the lessons from those adversities and setbacks are the ones that really accelerate and show up as the best version of themselves later on in their career. So that starts with some humility, right? You got to be able to step back and say, what was I missing there in that situation, and how can I learn and grow from it? And I mean, there's so many examples in the book. I had the honor of interviewing Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase, who is probably the most, one of the most iconic CEOs in corporate America today, and he's very vulnerable, very open about some of the mistakes he's made in his career. I'll give you one example. He was at home one day on a phone call with one of his team members, and was very angry and was berating his team member on the phone. And his middle daughter started crying and asked her dad, "Why are you so angry?" Well, that was a wake up moment for Jamie Dimon. He knew that he needed to show up differently with his team. And that was a lesson taught to him by his middle daughter. And so consequently, and this was probably 15, 20 years ago, he's still blunt, he's still direct, but he tries to show up a little bit more empathetic and with a little more sensitivity. And I just think the best leaders draw from those moments of vulnerability and frankly, self-awareness, or in that case, a lack of self-awareness, which has contributed to a higher self-awareness today.
Do you think there's any element of having to have that full gambit, having to be able to be blunt, having to be able to be harsh when you need to be harsh, but having the cognitive awareness that you should employ empathy and bringing things down to a human level? I think if you have one side or the other, it's a yin-yang thing. I don't think it works. If you're just really on the empathetic side and you're trying to appease everybody, that doesn't work. And if you're really on the excuse my language, but busting balls side and everything has to be yelled and screamed at and kicking trash cans, that doesn't work either. So
yeah, no, it's a good point you raised, Ron. I think the number one blind spot in corporate America today is people pleasing. I tend to be the classic people pleaser, so I've got to be aware, avoiding tough conversations, this desire to be liked in the office. It's a real danger. And there's one study that I source in the book that over 50% of Americans refer to themselves or think that they're, people pleasers. And I see that in corporate America. And that is pretty destructive. So you have to be aware of it. You have to understand that it can be poisonous in an organization and in a culture. So you're right. You've got to be able to have the balance of being able to speak blunt truths and but also be empathetic and have a high level of emotional intelligence, and that just takes time and takes high self-awareness.
As a consultant in this space, the merger and acquisition space, usually in small companies, companies in the sub $10 million revenue range, SBA and loan SAP range, I'll tell you, I've probably spoke to over 300 easily 300 business owners in 3 years. We did 200 for one marketing roll-up, but so probably 400 or more. One of the biggest flaws is leaving people what I call the wrong butts in the wrong seat, right? They have maybe even they have the right people on the bus, but they allow people to be in roles and responsibilities they're not excelling at because they're trying to people please, right? Yeah. They've got a sales guy who doesn't churn out numbers, but he happens to be the son of one of the loyal employees that's worked there for 30 years. Or they have somebody who's in tech that, I interviewed one guy, they had his head tech guy had no business being in tech. He didn't, I'm a techie from previous trade. This guy didn't know what he was talking about, right? He's breaking their computers left and right because he's trying to figure it out. But, he hired him because it was a friend's kid, and his friend told him he was really good with computers. Right? So, but the wrong button, the wrong seat is, I see it at this level, and I'm sure if you're a people pleaser, that happens at the biggest level too, right? Mm-hmm. I remember in the bigger corporations that I worked for back in the day, that was one of the problems even I did. I left people in roles that they didn't excel at because it was easier to leave them there than it was to replace them sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a serious issue, and it's why I think more organizations need to invest in 360 referencing, and feedback tools and other psychometrics to help leaders and business owners and entrepreneurs heighten their awareness. And the people pleasing thing is a real issue. I see it every single day. I see it in teams. I see it in leaders. I see it in myself.
Mm.
And you got to constantly battle against it, because you're just not going to advance an organization or show up as your best version of yourself if you're constantly motivated by being liked by everybody. That's not what leadership is. Leadership is leading, and sometimes you have to make tough decisions and unpopular decisions, and so yeah, it's a real issue.
So, how do
Yeah.
you? Numbers are not the leading indicator; they're a trailing indicator. By the time the numbers are affected, you've really got a problem. What would be a leading indicator that you've got a good leader in the place? What would be, something that would help these business owners and these guys that are listening to the show? They're talking about hiring CEOs and managers. What would be some of the earlier indicators that they got the right guy on the job?
I think you hit on it when you talked about culture. Every leader has a shadow, and every organization reflects the shadow of the leader at the top of the organization. So, if a leader can understand that they have that shadow, that they can, in terms of the values that they want to model, it all starts at the top. And so, if the culture is healthy, if there's collaboration, if there's a focus on excellence and quality and performance, and there's obviously empathy and developing of other people, and the leader is modeling that through his or her shadow every single day, I think that's a leading indicator. I think another indicator, Ron, is a leader who engages with the team, and is not isolated. A walk around leader, a leader who asks and doesn't tell, right? Who is involved in what I like to refer to as humble inquiry. Walks over to somebody's desk and genuinely and authentically asks, "Well, what are you working on today?" That's really important to have that connection. I think, by the way, and I'm sure you've talked about Elon Musk on your show. That's one of the measures of his success as a manager. He tends there's no hierarchy. He walks around, spends time with the engineers, sits around a table, brainstorms ideas, and I think that has a lot to do with his remarkable success. And I see that a lot in organizations and leaders that are successful. A walk around leader who's engaged with his or her team.
I used to call that. That's what I used to call when I worked at the site and some of the. I called it management while walking around. I would,
Yeah.
I would block hours. Probably, I had 187 employees when I about that something like that at one point there. I'd block sometimes 2 or 3 hours out a day and go just like, okay, this is my floor time where I would go sit in the network operating center. Like, okay, what's going on? Oh, no, what's going on in your personal life? What's going on with what are you working on?
Yeah.
What could improve your job here? I boiled it down to 4 questions. It's the three that I ask almost every time, and the fourth one probably I ask people once a quarter. And maybe I oversimplified it, but everybody's listened to the show has heard it over and over again. It's what are we doing well? So we pat the guys on the
Mm-hmm.
back. What's going well for you? What's working, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where
Mm-hmm.
can we have some improvements, or right? What can we fix? And then what are we totally missing? What are our competitors doing?
Yeah.
What tools do you, if you just had them, that would make your job easy? What's missing? And then
Yeah.
once a quarter or so, I say, hey, what are we doing? We probably should totally stop, right? We're probably doing things that are just a waste of time and energy. We spent, they're long past their this isn't working stage, and we're still doing them. So,
Yeah, what you're referring to, I think, is excellent. It's creating a feedback culture.
mhm.
The organizations that really thrive, I think, have a very transparent feedback culture where you don't wait until the end of the year to give a performance review. You have constant feedback every day. In the moment.
Mhm.
Feedback is a gift, and when organizations and leaders embrace it as a gift, man, their organizations really thrive. I think that's another leading indicator. as you put it. Has an organization and a CEO or a president of a company or an owner created a feedback culture where they are receptive and open to getting feedback? And is that consistent, around the team as well?
It also helps for I did it because that was one of my second or third management positions. I moved up pretty quickly, and I honestly, it was like I had what they call imposter syndrome. I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. So the best way for me to know what I was doing is just constantly get feedback from people, right? What are we doing well? What can we improve upon? And it's just stuck. It just worked. And to this day, if I hold a staff meeting with my team, or whatever, we always start with those three core questions. Like that said, sometimes I think you oversimplify things, and people kind of know it, and they come with prepared things. But being able to say, okay, with one of the employees or something, go, here's what's working really well with you. Here's what I really like. Here's where I can see some improvements. Here's a skill set you're totally missing. Because I do it on the management level of individuals too, not just in general for their job, but I give them the feedback, and then I expect them to do it with me, right?
Yeah.
I know, I know myself. I know that there's a lot of areas I might be slightly on the spectrum. I've been accused of it more than once. So I don't do things what normal people do. I don't I've worked with people for 2 years and not knew they had a family and kids, right? Just didn't think to ask one. And that said, I honestly see this whole spectrum of bringing on outside leaders and to run companies and to do this as being way more involved than most of these new entrepreneurs coming out of search funds and the guys that are trying to buy their first company ever imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're referring to is so important about. I love the example that you talk about. For years you didn't know, or for a long period of time you didn't know much about your colleagues or your employees' families. That's very, I would say, self-aware on your behalf to recognize that. That's the first step, by the way. The second step is to have the courage. Wait, the second step is to have the courage. That flaw, and then third step really is to step out of your comfort zone. It's that courage, of practicing asking your employees how they're doing, and how are things going on at home. And now that may not go anywhere. They may not want to talk about it, but at least you're inquiring and you're showing a little empathy. And by the way, that builds incredible trust, as long as it's authentic and genuine. And I worked with a leader once. We did a 360, and this guy was an engineer, an operator's operator. He was all about getting things done and was very, very good at it, by the way. And of course, his 360 showed that he was very low in his empathy scores. And so we asked him, I said, hey, think about the practice makes perfect, principle, which is, the more you do something, the more you repeat it, it ultimately starts to happen. So he did start to walk around and ask his team members how things were going, and he figured out some things and found out some stories about some of his employees. And he's still a little bit introverted, and he still sort of has that engineer sort of mindset. But I think, over the years, the feedback I've gotten from his colleagues is he is starting to show up as a little more empathetic and a little bit more interested in what's going on with his people.
I bet if you asked him, if you're still working with him, one of the things I found for myself and quite a few people that have the same issue that I do, as far as where they're like the operator, vision. I'm more of a problem-solving vision guy. I want to solve the next problem. When it comes time to turning the gear the same way over and over again, I don't want to do that. I want somebody else to do it. Yeah. But I'm also very much so a lead follower, get the hell out of my way type of person. So, and I just want to give me the high-level stuff, the nitty-gritties for the other people. Give me enough that I can get the details, I can solve the problem and move on. That said, I'm also, one of the reasons I think that I push so back hard on the empathy is I'm a natural empath. I feel emotions. When I walk into a room, I can feel if it's negative, and it impacts me, and it slows me down in some of my areas of life. So throughout as a kid throughout. Now I've got to where I push that away so much. Now they have to bring it back in. I wouldn't be surprised if you had a deep talk with the individual who has a hard time with empathetic moments, is because it hits him, right? When he
Yeah.
does talk to somebody and they're having problems at home, or he does talk to somebody and they just lost a loved one or whatever, he feels that emotion, and in such a way that it's distracting to what he's trying to get done for the day. It bugs him, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
he can do to solve it. If you can't fix it, like if you're a problem solver and you can't fix the problem, some things they just have to be, right?
Yeah.
You can't fix
Yeah.
somebody just losing their spouse or their loved one or a mom or something like that. You just can't fix that, right?
Yeah.
And the inability to fix something makes me want to not even talk about it, right? I would imagine that a lot of times you'll find out these guys who are having a hard time with empathy, it's because they're a natural empath. They feel the emotions of other people
Yeah.
deeper than the normal person would, and they're avoiding that awkward. You were talking about avoiding tough conversations. That's just a
Right.
tough conversation for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, the way I would summarize this is every leader has a blind spot. It's kind of the physics of leadership. You could be self-deluded and think you don't have blind spots, but we all do. So the first step is, can you name your blind spots, whatever it is? Are you less empathetic? Are you command and control? Are you a people pleaser? Whatever it is, you need to be able to name your blind spot. And then the second step, of course, is, do you have the courage to engage it and to show up differently as a leader? And I find that the leaders who do that, heighten their self-awareness, and they show up as the better versions of themselves, and their organization tends to thrive.
When you're doing your executive search, how do you find people that have those characteristics? Basically, how do you identify somebody? Because everybody will tell you, like, what's your biggest weakness? That's so common of a question inside of an interview process. Most of the time, you're just going to get BS blowed back at you. But can you tell? You've been in this long enough. Can you tell when it's authentic? Can you tell when somebody really knows themselves and really knows their own blind spots, or do you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I think the leaders who show up in an interview or in a process that we're involved in, who can share their story, their career story in a compelling way, which includes, by the way, their accomplishments and their strengths and their capabilities, but also authentically identifying those blind spots, and how, not just listing your weaknesses and moving on, but talking about how they've been able to overcome them and how they're continuing to battle them in a very authentic and genuine way, with examples, with illustrations. Those are the ones that sort of stand out for me, because they have that genuine humility, and again, they present themselves as somebody who's not the finished product as a leader. And so those are the standouts. Now, having said that, Ron, they still have to have the competency and the expertise and the functional skills, the self-confidence and self-belief of leader. They still need to make the tough decisions, as a leader, a CEO, an owner, of a business. But you consider all those things, and then you make your best judgment and recommendation to our clients about somebody's capabilities and suitability for a role.
I have an internal belief that there are very few CEOs that can be the CEO of a company long term, when I'm talking 10 or 20 years. And let me explain why, and then I want your feedback on this, because I'd love to be proven wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I get this from when I was in the VC world, where I was working for companies that are funded by VCs, trying to understand why they swap leaders out throughout the process. And it's because it takes a different person to take a company from an idea to market fit. It's a different skill set than it is to go from market fit to the first million, and from the first million to maybe the first 10 or 20 million. And then after that, it takes, then you get really into systems and processes and formalizing things, and you start going from $20 million to a $100 million company. Very few people can be so self-aware that they can grow through the leadership process to be the right person at the right time through that entire process.
Yeah.
A lot of companies, a lot of people are really great at taking a company from, a $10 million company to a $100 million company, or a $10 million company to going public. but
Mm.
then, they really don't shine in that public realm. Have you found that to be true, or have you found there is a way to detect somebody who can grow that? If you look at Oracle and some of these other things, you can even see where those guys backed out for a little bit, let somebody else be CEO, because they at least they had the self
Yeah.
awareness to acknowledge, wait a second, we're not doing the right thing here. We need somebody who can take this knowledge. Wait a second,
Yeah.
we're not doing the right. But
Yeah.
they're than us to take it through this stage.
Yeah. No, I think you make a good point. I mean, particularly in the tech sector, the entrepreneurs and founders of many of those companies had the self awareness down the road to hand it off to an operator who had a different skill set. I think the broader point that you're making, I think, is also true, and that is, I think most CEOs. By the way, I think the average CEO in a public company today is there for 5.5, 6 years. It's decreasing, by the way, because the demands on the job and the complexity of the job is so complicated. But there are exceptions, by the way, Ron. I mean, Jamie Dimon is almost 20 years in the seat at J.P. Morgan. That's an exception, by the way. Not many legendary CEOs can serve for almost 20 years. Typically, it's a lot shorter than that. But yes, it does. It does. Require humility and high self-awareness to recognize that it's time to maybe step aside and turn it over to the next generation, to reinvigorate the leadership team with a new spirit from a new leader. And sometimes those retiring CEOs go on to be executive chairs or serve in other board roles, or they move on to their next venture, where they can add value and create value. So it's really a good point that you're making. I think it's healthy to have turnover and succession. We're obviously every single day involved in advising our clients on CEO succession and making sure that that's done properly.
It's worth studying the people who've done it for 20 years. It's worth studying on.
Yeah,
My first question, if I had him here on the show, is how many times did you have to reinvent yourself?
yeah,
Right through
yeah,
through your growth cycle of a 20-year CEO, there had to be times where you're like, hey, I gotta, do some self awareness and reinvent myself as the guy I need that this company needs in this moment.
yeah. And I think the ones that have a longer tenure and have had success typically create a different structure where their lieutenants have a lot more authority and autonomy to run their businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as hierarchical, and their leaders feel a little more empowered because they're running those businesses, as if they're mini CEOs within a company. And by the way, that's getting them more prepared and ready for succession or for another CEO role somewhere else in the industry. Yeah, I mean it's unusual, to have somebody serve 15, 20 years of a major, global public company.
It,
Jamie Dimon would certainly be the exception.
I I've only had a couple of roles where I had P&L responsibility, where I actually had to track my own profit and loss for my division of the company. It's a totally different game, right?
Yeah,
It's totally
yeah,
different when you have to go argue for a budget to buy $30 million of hardware because your data center needs to be revamped. When
yeah,
you're also responsible for tracking the profit and loss of your division, and you have to show them like, okay, this is going to be return on investment. I think
yeah,
more managers should be held to a P&L or to a mini CEO model. I love the whole concept behind the book, The Great Game of Business, right? Which they gamify it, and they teach all the employees, and all the management definitely, but most of the employees, what their day-to-day operations do to the P&L, to the balance sheet, to the to the expenses and stuff, so they know their individual impact.
yeah. I mean, again, I just I think it's important for any CEO or owner to keep pushing authority down and focusing more on strategic issues, letting leaders, drive P&Ls, as you said. It gets them ready for the next assignment. It's just proper governance, if you will. The other thing I would say, by the way, boards, really have a responsibility to pay close attention to the effectiveness of their leader. Because if they're in that role 10, 15 years, they may lose the edge in terms of thinking strategically or thinking in terms of innovation. You may need to bring in somebody that can create a spark or can be the catalyst for thinking about, new innovations or new ways to grow your business. So that's why you have to have turnover. That's why you have to have succession.
I don't I don't care what somebody offered me. I would never be the CEO of a publicly traded company. And the reason why is I think our system is flawed in that if you're the CEO of a public company, you have to constantly increase the value of the shareholders. Let me give you an example real quick, a short one. If I have a company, and let's just say I make chocolate, and we do really good. It's a company that's been around for 30 years, and it cranks out steadily $100 million of profit a year. Right? We've been doing it for 20 years. I go public. It's no longer good that next year I do 100, and the next year after that I do 100 million, right? Because when people are trading it, that gives them no increased value in their shares. So,
Right.
in that realm, I honestly think that not all companies should be public. Not all companies
Yeah.
would benefit from that need to constantly be better this quarter than it was last quarter. There's
Right.
a stage where something's running really well, and as long as you don't decline, and because you still have to be innovative, you can't stay at $100 million year in and year out with all the competition of a free market
Mm-hmm.
and not be innovating and changing things. But to push CEOs to say you have to increase shareholder value year over year over year puts them in decisions where a lot of times they make bad decisions because they have to take risks to try to do something that, yes, we made $1 billion last year. We're going to make $1 billion this year. Oh, you're fired because you didn't increase the value.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. There is a little bit of that quarter to quarter treadmill. That is a bit of a problem. I find that the CEOs and the management teams that overcome that think more long term. I mean, yes, they still respond quarter to quarter, but they operate based on a 5, 10 year, even longer, 15, 20 year plan. A lot of the clients I work with in oil and gas,
yeah,
the large global energy companies, they're making 5, 10, 20 year investments, capital investments. So they do think longer term, which I think is very, very healthy. But they still have to operate, obviously, in the quarter to quarter environment. But I think they do that pretty well. But yeah, you raise a good point. I mean, the whole debate between public and private. I have a lot of friends in the energy business, and they run private companies, and they sure are grateful and blessed to be, operate in a private structure versus a public structure. It's much more complicated. And then, of course, you have the whole issue of dissident activist shareholders who get involved, and many of whom, are healthy, by the way. They're healthy in terms of accountability, but sometimes a little bit unhealthy because they focus so much on the short term and not on the long term.
I want to dive back into this picking the right CEO because our audience are typically merger and acquisitions guys who are buying companies usually in that SBA realm, so it's much smaller than you're used to. So in that $5 million range, I'd say we got a fair amount of people who are in that. Working through investment bankers, they're raising some capital and they're buying a $10 or $20 million business. That said, how long does it take to find a CEO? Let's break it down in two steps. 'Cause I don't think there's two steps. There's the analyzing the business to figure out what the right CEO would be for a business, and then there's the act of going out and finding the person, like defining the seat and the culture and what it takes. What would it take to be a great CEO at company X? It has to take some
Yeah.
amount of time, and then now finding the person to put in that seat and make sure the match has to take some amount of time. So with those two elements, how long do you think each one of them on average takes for you're very experienced in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the issue you're raising is around due diligence on a deal. Much of the due diligence, as you know, in M&A is around financial due diligence. Huge emphasis there. You get a banker involved, and you assess and evaluate the value of a business. You look at accounting, you look at receivables, you look at all the financial due diligence. and that's important. I'm not de-emphasizing that, but I think the organizations that do it well focus even more on things like culture and leadership, whether there's the leadership and the talent within, let's say, an acquiring business that is sustainable. Um, and if there isn't, how do you compensate, and what kind of leadership do you need to bring in? So I think anybody looking at a deal obviously has to do the financial due diligence, but I think the leadership due diligence and the culture due diligence is important. Making sure that when these deals fail, by the way, and you know this, it tends to be over integration. When you can't get two cultures working closely together,
Right.
so there has to be an investment post acquisition to make sure that the teams can come together, the cultures can come together, you can agree on a set of values that are core to the business. Those are all important elements of a successful M&A transaction.
I've boiled that down to it's a failure of communication, and and what you said is perfectly correct, because without knowing the inner workings, the culture, the environment, even the technical language, like every industry has its own like language, like engineers and programmers, we all have our own like terminologies and stuff for certain things. You can't effectively communicate merging two groups together if you don't understand how the other person learns, listens, and what they respect, right? The
Yeah.
culture, right? So, a lot of people oversimplify it and basically say, well, it failed during integration. I was like, well, you failed because you didn't know how to communicate with the other party. You bought something you
Yeah.
didn't truly know who they
Right.
are and how they communicate and what they value in the world. And then you try to communicate your values to them and they just can't see it.
Yeah, I think it's important for anybody thinking about a deal to consider the cultural leadership and talent pieces. Very important part.
Once you have that down, once you understand the cultural environment, the leadership structure that's already there, and it's time to, like a lot of these guys, they really seriously know that they're not going to be the CEO long term. They think they're going to buy the company, run it for 4 or 5, 6 months, and then they're going to find the right executive to take it over so they can get back and be in the mergers and acquisitions game of buying the next add on or whatever. My gut feel is most of them grossly underestimate the time it takes to both understand who would be the right person and understand how long it takes to onboard that person and get them up to full speed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think anybody considering a deal should carve out enough time to consider the leadership implications, and frankly, we get involved in that. Ron, we sometimes are retained by clients to help them assess the team. Sometimes they have to make tough decisions because there's duplicative roles and responsibilities, and unfortunately, in an M&A situation, you don't need two CFOs, right? You don't need two CEOs or two chief operating officers. So you got to make some tough decisions, and sometimes it's helpful to bring a objective third party in to do an assessment and give your judgment. And so we will do that. We will help clients in large M&A leadership due diligence.
Now, you have a new book coming out. I see it behind you there. Where what is
Yeah.
that about, and what led you to write that one?
Yeah, so it's really I kind of the tagline on the book. It's aware the power of seeing yourself clearly, a diary of a corporate headhunter, and really the reason I have the tagline "Diary of a Corporate Headhunter" because it's really observations, over 30 plus years, and what I've noticed. Among the best of the best leaders is they do have this unique combination of self-belief without the self-absorption, and it hinges on a high level of self-awareness. So the book is written based on experience, but the book is also deeply rooted in research and data. There was a book in 2018 that really resonated with me, written by Tasha Eurich, called "Insight: Why we are less aware than we really think we are." And in her book, 95% of respondents think that they're self-aware, but only about 10 to 15% truly are. So you got about 80% of people walking around who are self-deluded in thinking that they're self-aware. And I thought, wow, that's such a low number, 10 to 15%. And I thought, well, what does our research say at Heidrick? So we looked at 75,000 leadership assessments. Those are 360s. And our number on self-awareness was about 13%. So very low. We're living in a deficit of self-awareness today. And, the next question that people might ask is why? And I make the argument in the book, it has a lot to do with our digital culture. We're distracted by, the swipes and the mentions and the likes and the notifications from social media. And it's literally sucking the dopamine. And so we're constantly plugged in, but we're not plugged into ourselves. We're not taking the time to self-reflect. So that's the argument I make in the book. And thank you for mentioning it. It is out in a couple of weeks. August 19th is the official publication date.
So it's going to be on Amazon for pre-order now, right?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, Simon & Schuster, Barnes & Noble. There's an audiobook version. Obviously, there's the hardcover book version as well.
Oh, cool. So, I told you before you turned on the mic, I was writing the software, and one of the things it does is it enables you to quiz yourself to see where you think you are at in the communication skills. I honestly, I ran a lot of tests. I had only about a dozen or about 2 dozen now beta testers. And I kept thinking my algorithm was wrong because they're quizzing at one level and they're scoring when they put a real video to be analyzed. The scores were coming way lower. And then the book, I was doing some research and that book came up. And I was like, okay, this is a natural human behavior. We always think that we're better. And we even test better than we truly perform, right? We test, we know what we're supposed to do, but we don't do it. Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm finding in the software is a lot of people know what they're supposed to do to build the trust, real rapport, to have effective communications, the stuff that the software will test you on. But when it comes down to it and you analyze, an hour or 2 hours worth of conversations, they don't exhibit what they know.
Yeah, I just find, and I think your research shows this as well, we tend to have an overinflated view of our capabilities. And, case in point is around self-awareness. And so that's a blind spot, right? And so the book, by the way, is really about blind spots. It's about being able to identify them and engage them and show up better. That's really what it's about.
It takes a lot of work to write a book. What was the main goal for writing that? What are you hoping to achieve by having CEOs and leaders of the world read your book?
I've always been fascinated with leadership. Everybody's, there's so many books on leadership. So, the field is crowded with different theories and arguments. And obviously I made the case 20 years ago when I wrote Trust, the one thing that makes or breaks a leader, that's the essential quality. You have to build trust in your organization. But when I thought about the awareness angle, awareness is almost like the preventative medicine, right? Because if you can enhance your awareness, you can mitigate cases of broken trust, right? So the two arguments I think are consistent. I just think the awareness angle is maybe peeling the onion a little bit deeper. And then the timeliness of it, I think, is important because I think we're living in an age where it's just harder to take time to self-reflect and to get away and truly see yourself clearly. And the point is, when you can see yourself clearly, by the way, not just flaws and blind spots, but also strengths, capabilities, superpowers, we can then show up better and our teams and our organizations will thrive. And that's really what, my objective is.
Yeah, I've often considered what's going to happen with my children. I have a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old right now. And with AI and technology and this instant gratification world we live in where I can order anything I want off of Amazon and it'll be here tomorrow, or sometimes even the same day, right? And I can order anything I want to off the internet, that's software or whatever, and I don't have to wait for a CD to be mailed to me anymore. I just download it and work, I'll be using it within 30 seconds of, deciding I want it.
By the way, Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the book Anxious Generation, which has been a New York Times bestseller list, I'm sure you've heard about it. He just did a study, I think it came out yesterday, and based on his math and his calculation, the Gen Z generation will spend 25 years of their entire life on their phone.
I see
Think
it.
about that. Think about the implications of that. And so those those are realities in our world that are fighting against self-awareness. And so that's why I think the book hopefully is timely, because it'll make leaders more conscious and aware that they need to be fighting against this culture, which is battling against taking time to reflect and and really understand your strengths and weaknesses better. Because when we do, and all the research and data shows this, I mean, self awareness is the number one tool that a leader has for transformation, right, and growth. And so that's the argument I make in the book, and I hope that. I hope it's timely. I hope that readers will enjoy it, and I've been excited about the journey.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for putting in the work to get it done. Like I said, I know that's a lot of work, and it's a testament to what you want to accomplish in the world that you're actually putting that out there. So, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, no, it's been a labor of love, and such so great to spend some time with you and have this conversation, Ron.
yeah. So, is there anything else we want to share before we? I've asked you a bunch of questions. There's, I always ask, like, what should I have asked? Like, what did I miss here? Right. So,
Well, no, you were very kind. Thank you for mentioning the book. It is available on Amazon and all retailers, and so look forward to getting it out there.
sound like you have a little one in the background too.
Yeah, we got some little ones running around. Yeah, yeah, little grandkids.
I started late. I'm 53. I still have a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old. So no grandkids yet. All my friends have grandkids, but I started late due to military and other reasons. I just didn't have kids earlier on in life. That said, I love the screeching, so don't worry about it. It's really cool. And anybody else that doesn't like it, that's on them. So
We've got seven, and the eighth grandchild's on the way. So it's a lot of fun.
I bet, I bet. So I want to end up with somebody wants to work with you, and maybe they're in the oil and gas. I do have a lot of people in the Texas area. I lived in
Yeah.
Texas for a while myself, up in the Dallas area though. That said, if somebody wants to work with you, what's the best way to reach out to you? Is it like LinkedIn or email?
I have a website. And listeners are free to reach out. There's lots of material on the website, by the way, that might be helpful to them as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
It's www.lescsorba.com, lescsorba.com. That's probably the best way to connect, and look forward to following up.
Awesome. I'll make sure those links and everything are in my in the show notes, so that somebody who's driving or listening to this on a podcast, they don't have to pull over and do that. So just know that it'll be in your show notes. There'll be a link there, so you can gather that up. Thank you for being here today. We'll wrap that up, call it a show, hang out for a few seconds, and thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Have a great day.
All right.